Yeah, very sobering images that are coming out this morning, giving an indication of the might of the Russian forces that are amassed just north of the capital, Kyiv, and still heading down there. Those images show what we believe was a main armoured division yesterday that was certainly a few miles long. It's now put at more than 40 miles long. I think the reason for this is that the vehicles on the images that were released yesterday were showing them about 3 abreast or so. And I think now the convoy has snaked out. So still the same massive convoy in terms of there being hundreds of armoured vehicles, tanks, armoured personnel carriers, troop transport vehicles, fuel supply vehicles, other logistics, ammunition and food supply trucks. So all they need really to encircle Kyiv, if that's what they want to do, and all intelligence sources suggest that may well be the aim. Now, we've been getting some intelligence information out, obviously from Western allies, always important if the UK and the US can do their own intelligence and analysis on the ground. And we've been hearing from a US senator, that Senator Chris Murphy has been tweeting after a briefing. He said, just leaving a classified briefing on the Ukraine crisis, he said confirmation that the Russians have fallen behind their timeline. The Ukrainian resistance has been fierce and there have been multiple Russian losses, he said. He's also calling for the budget to be sorted out, perhaps understandably more domestically orientated about their ability really to counter the Russian threat. They say that the Russians' ability to keep their supply lines running to Ukraine remains alive, but Russia, as I said at the top there, will encircle Kyiv. They also say that US and allies are coordinating to not only freeze the assets of Putin and his oligarch allies, but also seize those assets as well. This is likely a further step that Putin's inner circle hadn't anticipated, and so he believes that that is further pressure, the united front that the US, the UK, many other allies in the West are putting together. In terms of the fighting overnight, it has again been relatively quiet in the capital, Kyiv, but there had yesterday been fierce fighting in Ukraine's second city, Kharkiv, in the northeast. There were images that were released of that fighting that had showed what appeared to be cluster munitions being dropped in a residential area of Kharkiv. The Ukrainian military say that Russian-grad rockets had also been used. They're putting the death toll at dozens of people. The United Nations Aid Agency chief has been speaking about this. He said, Martin Griffith, that he is very concerned at the mounting death toll. Let's have a listen.
The scale of civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure, even in these very early days, is alarming. Humanitarian needs are growing at an alarming pace in the hardest hit areas. Civilian children, women and men have been injured and killed. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights reported at least 406 civilian casualties, including at least 102 dead in these few days.
And as I say, they believe that the death toll is likely much, much higher than the official estimates that they've got at the moment. We've seen pictures that are coming out regularly from Ukraine that show residential areas that have been targeted, that have been struck, either deliberately targeted or accidentally struck. Regardless, when you are mounting an invasion of a country and fighting takes place in cities, then you're going to have civilian casualties. And that, in turn, has led to a significant influx of the refugees to neighbouring countries have spilt across the border. 500,000, the UN High Commission for Refugees was putting that at yesterday. It is likely to be higher than that again today, and there's something like 7 million people internally displaced in Ukraine as they're fleeing areas where the worst fighting is taking place.
And also, Mark, Russia facing a war crimes investigation, we hear, not only over the deaths of 16 children, but also claims that it's using cluster bombs against civilians in Kyiv yesterday.
Yes, I mean, what the UN Criminal Court is going to do is certainly look at those incidents to see whether it warrants a prosecution. There are multiple reports coming out from the Ukrainians about what they claim are war atrocities, but that will have to be investigated. It's something that's likely to be very protracted because clearly there is fighting on the ground. You can't mount a proper investigation while that is underway, and it's likely to be later when that country is hopefully stabilised at some point that these proper investigations can begin with a view, if they decide that, to mount a prosecution in The Hague. But at very early stages at that, they just say they're looking into the potential for war crimes. In the meantime, of course, you have got the talks which took place yesterday between the Ukrainians and the Russians. Now, it concluded without agreement, but on the positive side, at least they're still talking and have agreed, we understand, to come back to the negotiating table tomorrow, not tomorrow, but in the next 2 or 3 days. They say that they're going back to their respective countries to speak to the leaders in those countries to talk about areas where they feel that there might be a chance of reaching some agreement, but only time will tell as to whether they can have a proper ceasefire.
Agreement over what? What are they negotiating? Surrender?
Well, the Ukrainians want an immediate ceasefire and the Russians to withdraw. Well, they might get a ceasefire. They're not going to get anytime soon, I don't think, the Russians agreeing to withdraw. As far as the Russians, well, nobody really knows. I mean, they had said before that they went into Ukraine, that they wanted to stabilize that region, demilitarize the region and denazify it as well, whatever that means. So, the Russians, the Ukrainians, they say, some issues of potential for agreement, but we'll only, again, know in the fullness of time. There's still talking to take place, clearly. I think the immediate goal has to be a ceasefire, even if it's just a cessation of violence, to allow those refugees, people in the worst affected areas, to get out of there and get to safer areas in Ukraine or indeed across the border into friendlier countries.
It suits the Russians, does it not? I mean, we're talking about these convoys, and one of the reasons that they are behind in their timeline is basically, to put it crudely, they've run out of petrol.
Well, I think there's certainly something to be said for that. I think there is logistical problems. We are hearing that from both US intelligence agencies and defence intelligence here in the UK, who've been carrying out analysis of what's been going on the ground. It is a massive logistical operation. Ukraine is a huge country next to Russia. It's the largest country in Europe. So it takes hundreds of miles to get even from the north in Belarus down to the capital, Kyiv. And when they're coming under attack, those supply trucks, those fuel tankers being targeted by these anti-tank, anti-armoured vehicle missiles supplied by Britain and the US. It is taking a toll, there's no doubt. But let's not underestimate the power that Vladimir Putin has at his disposal, and he hasn't used that full power. But the real concern is the more setbacks he suffers on the ground, the more of his troops that he loses and armoured vehicles and tanks that he loses, the more violent he may turn in terms of the weapons and the ferocity with which he may decide to bomb some of Ukraine's cities. We know that, as I say, from Kyiv yesterday, there was significant bombing there. We may be seeing a ratcheting up of the efforts by the Russian military in some of these key locations. As I say, the more losses he suffers, there is a real fear that he becomes increasingly desperate in the measures he uses to gain control of Ukraine.